Welcome to Delilah in soft pastel on velour paper. So here's my initial transfer drawing, and I'm going to go over my lines with a 6B charcoal pencil to darken them. I'm being very careful where I put my 6B charcoal because it's going to show through the subsequent layers of pastel that I add as I make this painting. So I'm beginning with the eyes, and I'm carefully drawing the shape. Now this pastel is going to, or the charcoal pencil rather, is going to show through. So I'm going to be very careful that I get the shape exactly right. It'd be very difficult to change it once I put the charcoal pencil down. Now I'm also going to use my white charcoal pencil to add the highlights in the eye so that they'll show up later. I'm also highlighting the rim, the bottom rim of the eye. And just like the 6B charcoal, the white charcoal will also show up under the layers. Here I'm putting in the pupil, just kind of carefully placing it. And some other shadow areas that I want to make sure that I can find later. I start every painting with a good drawing. If you have a good drawing, then you're going to have a successful painting. But if you have a bad drawing to start with, it's very hard to correct that as you go along. So I'm drawing in the ear and shading in this shadow area between the ear and the side of the face. And now I'm putting in a few of the light hairs that are on the edge of the side of the face, and that will help me to find that area a little better after I add pastel later on. Take your time when you're doing this drawing. It's not a race. I like to spend a lot of time doing the drawing and making sure everything is correct. So in essence, I'm not really doing a value drawing underneath my painting. Some people do a full value drawing, but I am putting in all of the lines that I need and all of the shadow areas. Now here's some little white hairs on the bridge of the nose before it goes up into the forehead. That's going to be a nice identification marker for me later when I add color. I'm also using my charcoal pencil on its side. I'm not really using the point unless I'm drawing like around the eye, but I'm using it on its side to add the shadow areas around the eye. And you can see already the painting is developing. I mean, it's taking on the resemblance of our subject, which is Delilah. Now I'm ready to put in that second eye. So now I'm being very careful, and I am using the sharp point of my charcoal pencil. Oops, sometimes that happens. Pencils roll off the table. Now I'm using my white charcoal pencil to put in the highlights in Delilah's eye. and finishing the shape. When you're drawing either animals or people, you can make the eyes slightly larger than they are. Not too much bigger, but slightly larger. Putting in the shadow and the eyelid at the top of her eye. Now, if I don't like something, I can correct it with a kneaded eraser. I can't take it all off, but I can take some of the charcoal off with the kneaded eraser. And I always use a charcoal pencil. I don't ever use vine charcoal. It's very messy, and I much prefer the charcoal pencil. I'm putting in other shadow areas on the right side as I see them. This is where her ear meets her head, and there's a large shadow area here. And that helps give shape to the structure of her face, so we want to be sure and include that. Now I'm moving on to the nose and carefully drawing that in. Now you have a reference photo that came with this, and it's hard to see in that nose area, but if you look carefully, you can see how it's shaped. And I'm going to put in the highlights with my white charcoal pencil on the bottom edge of the nostrils. And on that outer edge and the top of the nose. I'm just going to put a little white color up there. I'm going to shade the nose now with my charcoal pencil. We're going to add lots more color on top of this, but this just kind of gives me the shape. And I do want to define all of these areas of the mouth because I don't want to lose those when I add the pastel on top. It would be very difficult to recover all that's going on in that area. So I'm going to shade it in lightly with my charcoal pencil. Now I'm working on the folds of the skin down in her neck area. I'm going to draw in her collar now, carefully adding the buckle. And I'm also going to outline those tags. That's going to add a nice touch to our portrait of Delilah. I'm going to speed things up a little bit, and you can watch me finish the drawing. I'm using my white pencil to add little hairs that go into the background and little white hairs in the fold of skin over her eye. Anywhere that I want to preserve a light area, I'm going to use my charcoal pencil, my white charcoal pencil for that. So where the ear meets the background and the top of the head, and the body, and put those highlights in on the buckle of the collar. Now we're ready to add our first coats of color to Delilah. Now I chose a 409.7 burnt umber. I wanted this dog to be more neutral in color rather than have that red tone that a golden retriever has. The lab doesn't have that. It is more of a champagne color. So I want my base coat to not be super red or have a lot of orange in it. So I chose the 409.7 Rembrandt burnt umber. So I'm putting an even coat of that all over the dog. I've sanded the end, and I'm using that to go around the eyes. I'm not going to cover the eyes or the nose. Now you can find out more about my techniques and watch some videos that are totally free on my website in the video section. They're called An Introduction to Pastel Painting and Techniques, and it'll show you and tell you all about sanding your pastels and how to use them on velour paper. So be sure and watch that. Now this is our base coat, and we're going to carefully apply this, and we're going to apply it very lightly. And then we're going to add other colors on top of that base coat to darken up our shadow areas and build up a nice set of layers before we add our final top coat hairs to bring life to this dog. So I'm going back and forth carefully and very smoothly and lightly, adding color to the dog. Now, as you can see, everywhere that I put the white charcoal pencil shows up underneath the brown, and also where I put the 6B black charcoal pencil, it shows up. So I can use the end of my stick or the side of my stick to add color. And it's just a very light layer. So I can come back and add more color if I need to. I'm going to speed this up a little bit while I finish adding the base coat layer to Delilah. Now I'm going to start to add some of the darker colors. Here I'm using a 409.3 Rembrandt to add some dark brown to Delilah's ears. If you don't have that color, you can also use 263 New Pastel Indian Red and also 353 New Pastel Cordovan, which I will be using those too. This was handy, so I thought I would use it. It's a nice deep brown. Now I've switched to the 263 Indian Red, which is smaller and fits into some of these smaller places on the dog's face much more easily. But it is the same color as the Rembrandt color. And I'm just using this in the areas where I see shadow, always looking at my reference photo to make sure I'm getting things in the right place. Now I've gone back to my base coat 409.7 burnt umber to put over top of that to kind of smooth out that dark color. Now I'm going a little bit darker with 353 Cordovan New Pastel. So I'm going over some of the areas where I put the 263, where the shadow is darker on the ear. And these are basically the two colors I'm going to be using to get the darks in at this stage in the painting. So here I'm using the Cordovan 353 to add the darker shadow areas in the folds of the ear. It's much darker color than the 409.3 or the 263 Indian Red. It's one of my favorite colors. I use it in most everything I paint. Now I've switched back to the 263 Indian Red. The cordovan is a cooler color. It correlates very strongly with Mars violet. And the Indian red is much warmer. Now this is 259 dark gray. So we have to take these shadows a little bit darker. So I'm going to use this dark, cool gray to darken the shadows. It's a neutral, so it makes them darker without adding any brown or red to it. It darkens things down very nicely. And here I've gone back to the 409.3, adding a shadow in the top of the bridge of the nose and over the right eye. And here again I'm using the base coat, the 409.7, to kind of blend that color in. It was a little harsh there. This is 263 Indian red. It's much easier to use a smaller new pastel than to use the bigger Rembrandts in these smaller areas. And that is the 353 cordovan. So I'm just continuing to add shadows. I'm deepening the shadows with the 259 dark gray. The eyes, particularly around the eyes, the skin and fur around the eyes, has a very gray tone to it. So I don't want things to get too red. That's my whole goal in this painting, is to have a nice lab that doesn't have too much red in the coat. So the gray works very nicely in darkening things down without adding too much red. I'm continuing to build the darks around the right eye using the 263, the 353, and the 259. I'll just let you watch me paint for a while. So I'm using only 3 colors at this point to build up the values in the dog. The 263 Indian red, the 353 cordovan, and the 259 dark gray. And I'll use those 3 colors to build up the areas around the face, because our light hairs will not show up unless we take the time to build these dark colors in the face, around the eyes and on the planes of the face. And here I'm darkening that shadow around the eye. It's a very deep set eye. Using the 353 now. It really gives character to our dog's face. And using the 259 gray under the lower lid of the dog's eye. I believe you can paint most anything with a set of new pastels and a set of half sticks of Rembrandts. And if things get a little dark, you can go back with your base color, the 409.7 burnt umber, and just kind of blend things in. Now I'm going to speed things up just a little bit while I continue adding the darks around the outside of the eye and down the side of the dog's face. So I'm still using the same three colors, the 263, the 353, which is darker, and the 259 dark gray. Now I'm starting to put in and build that shadow on the right side of the face that is cast by the ear. So I'm using the 263. Now I've switched to the 409.3 because I can cover a larger area with that. I could have used the smaller new pastels, but I chose to use a Rembrandt to color in that area and put that shadow in. And I always darken up an area if I see that it needs darkening. Now I'm using the 263 to start building the shadow on the right ear. It's curled back, so I'm using the 263 first, and then I'm putting in a darker area with the 259 new pastel where the shadow gets the darkest. That's cast by the ear. I'm using the 353 to darken the shadow a little bit more, deepen it a little further from that shadow. And I'm putting in a little bit of dark on the edge of the ear because there is a shadow where the roll is on the ear, but there's also a reflected lighter area just to the left of that shadow. And then the brightest light is to the right of the shadow. So now I'm using the 263 to darken the ear behind the fold of the ear where it rolls back. Now I'm using my 409.3 to put in the broad area of darker color on the right ear of our pup. So I can get a smoother application going back and forth with that Rembrandt. I can also kind of smooth it with my finger. It really doesn't move very much, but I always try to get it to move around. Now I'm going to put some color on the muzzle with the Rembrandt 409.3. I could use my 263 as well. Now I'm using my 353 cordovan to add the dark shadow areas in the folds of the skin in these areas around the mouth. So I'm going to go all the way down, putting in the dark in this little fold underneath his chin and his neck. This is the 409.7. I'm adding a little more base coat color to the dog and also going over the dark that I've added, and that kind of blends that in. Works really well. So I can go back and add additional layers of base coat as needed. So back to adding a few shadows now, a few shadows of little folds around the neck and in the neck. So here again, I'm using the Rembrandt 409.3 to add color to the body of the dog. I'm going to go around the tag and add that shadow that's cast by the tag and up around the collar as well. And my hand dips a little bit of out of screen area down there, adding that Rembrandt 409.3 down in those areas. Now I've picked up my 353 cordovan and I'm darkening that shadow under the tag with it. And that's going to add to the realism of our picture. We want to get our shadows correct and our values correct, and when we have our values correct, then our subject will read right to our viewer. It'll look very realistic. The key is values. Not so much the color, but the values of your object. Be it a tag on a collar or the values in the dog's face. It's very important. And now I'm using our base coat, the 409.7 again, to blend in those deeper values that I just added on the coat. My hand will go out of the view of the camera every now and then, but that's what I'm doing, is just blending those colors together. By doing this, this ensures that everything is smooth. We want a nice smooth coat. We don't want it to be uneven or choppy. So I'm taking my time to make sure everything is nice and smooth. I'm going all over my dog with my base coat to smooth out all the color, making sure everything is just the way I want it before I add any other colors to my painting. Now I'm going to use my 259 gray to darken the muzzle of this dog. It's very dark in this area. I don't want to start out using black. I want to gradually deepen the values. So I'm going to use gray on the front of his muzzle where it's darker. So I'm just going to add a light layer of 259 gray. I'm also going to use it on the bottom of his chin, right in the mouth area. And now I've moved down to his neck, and I'm using the gray there in the shadow areas as well as on the chest of the dog. And by using the gray, it pushes that area back so that the face, which is a bit warmer, projects forward. I'm also using the gray in the shadow area under the tags and in the front of the dog, which is also in shadow. This concludes part 1 of our series on painting this little puppy Delilah. Join me for part 2, where we paint her eyes and her nose.